So I would like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Mariah D. Joseph. She is a project coordinator for the Neuroscience and Education Lab, led by Drs. Clancy Blair and Sybil Raber at New York University. In this role, she oversees multiple NIH-funded studies examining the relationships between poverty and development. Prior to joining NYU, she worked as a research assistant in an EEG lab at Columbia University, investigating attention in kindergarten children from the Bronx School post-completion of the Mindfulness program. She has spent several years as a child mindfulness teacher, teaching mindfulness to children in California and to New York City public schools. Her past research experience includes various projects that explore the neuropsychological effects of early intervention programs for children experiencing poverty-related adversity. Mariah holds a BS in cognitive neuroscience from the University of California, San Diego, and an MA in clinical psychology from Teachers College at Columbia University. She plans to pursue a PhD in clinical psychology, where she can continue to work on the protective effects of early childhood mindfulness interventions. So thank you, Mariah. Welcome.
Well, thanks so much for having me tonight. You gave a great introduction of No Science. Just to recap, we are a team of scientists and different researchers spreading the knowledge of science to lay audiences. So in my talk tonight, you'll actually see a lot of metaphors and fun GIFs to kind of make it more engaging and adaptable. Well, we're here tonight. It'd be great if you could tweet anything interesting you find. We love to read them later. Also, you can find out more about neuroscience on our website by visiting noscience.org and visiting our Facebook. You just search for NoScience. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking a lot about mindfulness, but before I do that, I'm going to kind of touch on self-regulation and how that relates to mindfulness and why that's important. So before we talk about regulation, we're going to talk about dysregulation. So who has ever been on a subway where there's been someone that's screaming or yelling or causing some sort of disturbance, or maybe even right now you're feeling uncomfortable and hot and maybe a little dysregulated? Yeah, many of us. New York City life. So when you're dysregulated, obviously your heart races, your palms sweat, and you feel like you're out of control and you don't have control over your emotions or things that kind of happen in your environment, and you react rather than carefully respond and choose your response. In contrast, when you're regulated, you have composure, you're calm, cool, collected. If a distraction or something emotional comes up, you have the abilities necessary to respond to that stimuli rather than immediately react based on a stress response. Maybe you're acting like Obama, which I wish you could see this GIF. His expression is great. Just totally like a boss. So this is really how self-regulation feels, when you're in control. So before we really get into self-regulation, let's dive a little bit into some basic brain anatomy. So one of the most fundamental part of the brain is the neuron, which you see on the left-hand side. And you can kind of read, on the very left, you see the little squiggles are called dendrites, and it moves through the cell body, goes to the axon, and then the synaptic terminals are at the end. So these are specialized cells that we find in our brain. And these cells actually communicate with each other through electrical and chemical signals that scientists can measure with different devices, which we'll kind of touch on a little later. And the human brain, interestingly, has approximately 100 billion neurons, which is almost the same amount of stars in the Milky Way. And each neuron has as many as 15,000 connections with neighboring neurons, forming complex neural networks or neural circuits that get stronger each time neurons fire together. And a famous neuroscientist once said, Donald Hebb, neurons that fire together, wire together. Or you can think of a metaphor to remember this. Branches that grow together form together. And our neurons make up what we call gray matter. And this gray matter makes up the surface area of our brain called the cortex, which are the wrinkly folds that we see. And this gray matter is really just a cluster of the cell body, synapses, and dendrites. So every part of the neuron except for the axon. And gray matter development increases rapidly early on in childhood and slowly starts to decline as we age, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It does that for refining purposes, but as we age into our maybe elderly states, that can actually affect a lot of different functions that we rely on every day. And holding together all of our dense gray matter is our brain's white matter. It is our myelinated or insulated nerve fibers that wrap around the axon of the neuron, which you can kind of see in the middle, connecting all the different neural networks and circuits. And the function of this is to really speed up the communication between the neurons and allow for more efficient transmission of information, and to strengthen these connections and circuits that we use most often. And similar to gray matter, development plays a huge role on this. So when you're really young, you actually have more gray matter than you do white matter. So like I said, the critical period, you get a ton of new neurons. And then as time goes on, those gray matter or those neurons kind of wean away, and the white matter takes over and refines all of that. So you can kind of see in the very top image, from 2 weeks old and then going to 2 years old, the white matter really starts coming together. And you can also see that below in a really cool imaging technique called diffusion tensor imaging, which can collect the actual fibers that are in your brain connecting these circuits. So now that we have some of the fine details down, we're going to zoom out a little bit and focus on the circuit that we're going to be talking the most about tonight, which is the frontal limbic circuit. And this circuit is really responsible for self-regulation. And it involves two main brain areas. The first is our frontal lobe, which is right here, if you're facing this way. And then our limbic system, which is deep in the middle of the brain. And your limbic system includes many different other brain regions like the hippocampus and amygdala, but we're just going to call it limbic system for simplicity's sake. And this circuit really relies on feedback and feed-forward methods of communication. And so this really matters in self-regulation and dysregulation, which you'll kind of see as we go on to talk. And this ability to self-regulate didn't just magically happen. Our brains actually evolved very carefully from primates, evolving from the most primitive animalistic structures of the brain, like the limbic system, and slowly evolving over time to our most newest, most advanced part of the brain, which is our frontal cortex. And the way I kind of remember this is our limbic system is like our animal brain, and our frontal cortex is like our human brain, because that's kind of how things evolved over time. But I don't want to make the limbic system sound bad just because it's our most primitive brain region. It's actually, come to think of it, kind of like a lifesaver. We really need it to survive because it's responsible for instinctual drives like reproduction, hunger, and the fight or flight response when you're in a dangerous situation. So it's really necessary to survival, but the key here in self-regulation is it's about the communication between this human brain and this animal brain. It's really important. It allows us to self-regulate. And similarly, if we only had this limbic region, though, we would be living like wild animals. So this frontal cortex really adapted so that we can live a complex life in kind of a more chaotic or complex world. So I know I said kind of a lot of details, but I'm going to give you a nice little tool to kind of remember this and that you can take with you and teach other people. So this is called the hand-brain model, and it's how I actually teach a lot of the students I work with, even the kindergartners. And so this is a very easy thing to remember. So let's start with dysregulation. So if everyone put their hand up like this, fold your thumb like this. So this thumb here would be your limbic system, and where your amygdala lives, or your alarm system, remember it. And then if you fold your hands over like this, Can anyone guess what this region might be? The frontal cortex, yeah. So animal brain, human brain. So when you're dysregulated, you flip out, and your animal brain or your limbic system actually takes control of everything, and your frontal cortex goes offline. And all your control necessary to respond to the difficult stimuli or anything that's around you, you're not able to. So you feel this sense of, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. In contrast, when you're connected and your frontal cortex comes back online, you're in tune with what's going on. You receive the information coming from your limbic system, and you're able to quickly respond to whatever threat you're experiencing and kind of maintain that self-control as you move through it. And so you can kind of think of this as a bottom-up versus top-down regulation. But to be honest, we're human, and we can't always be like this all the time. It's easier said than done, and we really need tools to cope with the daily stresses of life, especially in New York City. So, which brings me to mindfulness. So, who has heard of mindfulness? Yeah, everyone. It's extremely trendy right now. Anderson Cooper just did it on 60 Minutes. I mean, it's all over the place. And although it is really hyped up, there is a reason for it, and I don't think it's talked a lot about enough in the media to really see what is the research saying, what are the good and bad things that the research is saying, and why should we care? But the main thing is, I think the reason it's so popular is because it's a very learnable skill that really anyone can learn in various populations and at different ages. So although mindfulness has its roots in Buddhist tradition, the common definition that's used in Western society right now is kind of the maintaining a moment-by-moment awareness of our thoughts, feelings, sensations, and surrounding environment, with an attitude of acceptance and non-judgment. So, and it's characterized by a sustained attentional control over habits that normally go unregulated. So, usually you're not really focusing on your thoughts and sometimes not focusing on your emotions, but this is really just bringing about a moment-by-moment awareness of what's happening inside of you and outside of you. And this is also done through practices such as breathing, yoga, visualizations, and sometimes just talking out about your habits and patterns. So, mindfulness contains at least 3 components that work closely together to constitute a process of self-regulation. The first is attentional control, and this is done by consistently redirecting your attention to your breath or your body, maybe when you're trying a focused practice like a breathing meditation. The ability to regulate your emotions. So when you feel an emotion arise, like anger or frustration, then you're able to be aware of that right away and redirect your attention somewhere else, or at least bring about this non-judgmental acceptance towards that emotion. And then finally, just overall enhance self-awareness. So the more you practice this skill, just the greater your overall awareness becomes, and you're able to quickly adapt to environments without even being in the middle of a mindfulness practice, and it just kind of becomes your way of being. So to kind of nail home this point, I brought what's called a mind jar, which I know might be hard to see. These are very easy to make, and kids and adults love them. So if I shake the jar like this, so the glitter is going all over the place, it's unorganized, it's moving very fast, it's foggy, you can't really see what's happening. So this would be a representation of dysregulation. But if you kind of set it down or leave it still, and you're just kind of watching it and noticing what's happening, slowly the glitter starts to settle. And the water gets clear. So this is kind of like your mind. You start noticing what's going on, and you stop for a moment and just watch. Objectively, you take yourself out of the situation. Your mind becomes clearer, and you're better able to navigate what you would like to do in that moment. So we're also going to try it out just for 2 minutes together. So I'm going to start us out by guiding you a little bit through the breathing, and then I'll let you do a minute on your own, and then I'm going to ring this bell to notify you that you can open your eyes. So a really short demonstration. So before we start, we'll just get our mindful bodies on, which is what I would call it with the little kids I work with. And that includes just bringing your feet planted on the floor. And if you can, sit back in a chair. Just make sure you're sitting back and your back is nice and straight. And you kind of feel like there's a string pulling up your head. So you maintain a body state of awakeness. So you're not trying to get sleepy here. And you're just going to begin by gently closing your eyes. And if you feel uncomfortable doing that, you can just direct your gaze to the floor. And then you may want to put one hand on your stomach and one hand on your heart. And without changing anything, just begin to notice your breathing. Just your normal breathing. Feel your body breathing in and breathing out. And if thoughts arise, that's okay. Just redirect your attention to your breath. I know that was short, but did that feel okay? Good. Now they're all regulated. I have a question for all of you. Can anyone guess how this simple practice might change the brain, or what mechanism might be involved in how this affects our brain? Any guess is fine.
More activity.
More activity where?
In your frontal cortex and your.
Very good. So it is actually enhancing this frontal cortex and the frontal limbic circuit so that our brains can be tuned in and connected. And there's actually a really cool mechanism that allows this to happen, that allows something as simple as this to physically change our brain. And that's a topic called neuroplasticity. So this is the idea that our neurons can physically change at the synapse and with their connections that they are making. And this is done through thinking, learning, and just normal day-to-day habits and behaviors. And interestingly, up until the 1960s, scientists thought that our brain was fixed and unchanging, that what we were born with was what we were stuck with. And so we now know that through experiences and through different things that we have control over, we can actually change what's going on inside of our heads. And our brain is literally like a muscle. So the more positive things you do with it, the stronger it becomes. So as it turns out, monks have known for centuries that meditation changes your brain, which is probably why they dedicate their entire lives to it. But then the question becomes, how do we measure this, and what does this really look like? And so some of the early studies on mindfulness were done by researchers just putting monks in brain scanners. And this is actually a famous monk who's also a neuroscientist called his name is Matthew Ricard. And then the researcher on the very right-hand corner is Dr. Richard Davidson from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so he was really the pioneer of this work. And he did different methods like MRI and EEG that measure different things inside the brain. And we can kind of get an inside look as to how these practices are changing these monks' brains. But although we noticed that the monks' brains, we didn't really know what this meant or how we could use this to translate to normal people or people who aren't living their whole lives as monks. And so we wanted to see how we can see these similar changes in everyone. And to do that, these ancient Buddhist practices really had to be translated to a secular Western society. And one of the people who really started this movement was John Kabat-Zinn, and he is at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. And in the late 80s, early 90s, he developed a program called Mindfulness-Based stress reduction. And he was literally just doing these practices in a pain clinic to help people manage their pain. And so he kind of fell upon it accidentally, and it became this huge movement. And it's inspired hundreds and hundreds of studies since. And it's great because he found a way to secularize and standardize how mindfulness is done. And so the program consists of 8 weeks, 9 courses, and once a week they meet with an instructor for 2.5 hours, going over different breathing practices, yoga practices, visualizations, and just talking about patterns of habits. And then in the end, you do a full day of silent meditation together as a team. And so this program was great because it allowed researchers to examine the pre and post effects of this program, and it doesn't take too much time. So what did they find? So a really interesting review paper just came out in Nature, which is a very well-established academic journal, showing that all the studies to date have actually shown similar effects of this MBSR or similar mindfulness programs on this frontal limbic circuit. And they actually found enhanced gray matter, or more gray matter and more white matter in the frontal lobe, and decreases in the amygdala, which is in our limbic system or our animal brain. And this also corresponded to feelings of less stress. And so you can see that just by changing the physical form of these brain areas, people are feeling real effects from it. And we can see that this is targeting this self-regulation circuit exactly. And some other really interesting studies done by researchers at UCLA and Harvard found that not only is mindfulness changing the brain after only 8 weeks, but it's actually showing a long-term protective effect for the natural effects of aging, which I mentioned in the beginning. As you age, your gray matter slowly declines. But they've actually showed that people who are frequent meditators, or who meditate mostly on a daily basis, over time, if they track what their brain is looking like, they are showing less age-related gray matter decline than the people who don't meditate. So you can see on the very top, there are more areas showing gray matter loss. And then on the bottom, where the meditators are, it's less abundant and it's more focused in specific areas rather than the whole brain. Now, I do want to make a point that all these studies are very exciting and show a lot of promise for the field, but there are a lot of limitations to the study, and we can't fully 100% say that mindfulness is directly causing these changes. There are certain things that we can't control in these experiments, and there's a lot more to be done to really give a concrete answer. But so far, this is the state of the research, and it is very promising to see what will come next. And although these studies with adults give us a lot of information, there's still so many other exciting discoveries to be made in the field. And one of those discoveries that really needs to be done is through children. And so knowing what we've learned about the brain and how critical the brain's development is when you're very young, children might actually show even greater changes in response to these mindfulness programs. And children today, already living in a chaotic world, are also the most susceptible to the effects of stress. And my lab at NYU actually studies how early life stress directly affects the brain and causes or increases your risk for poor outcomes like academic and physical and mental health outcomes. And although we can't always change the environment these kids are in, we can change their response to the environment. And that's why I think mindfulness is a really powerful tool that can be used with these children who are facing these early life stresses or early life adversity. So we can give them something to empower themselves to kind of thrive in the midst of this stress. So luckily, school-based mindfulness programs have become increasingly popular. And they're in a way kind of modeled after MBSR, but obviously translated for children. And thankfully, for famous people like Goldie Hawn, who actually created one of the famous programs called Mind Up, they really helped spread the word as to why these programs are important and why they're really needed in schools. So, but the question is, there's not many studies on this, so how do we begin studying this to children? So my old lab at Columbia University wanted to look at exactly this. And to do this, we actually wanted to use a direct measure of the brain called EEG, which I'll go into a little more after this. Because so many of the studies only use behavioral measures, which give us a lot of information about the children and how these programs are affecting them, but we don't really know what's going on inside their brain development. So this is kind of our clue as to how we might start looking at this. And so we started small and got a small sample from a school in the Bronx, Girls Prep, who we got connected with, luckily by a teacher who's on the left-hand side, whose name is Miss Love, which is real. That's just her perfect teacher, mindfulness teacher name. And she teaches mindfulness as a full-time teacher at the school, and she teaches kindergarten through 5th grade, 40 minutes, 3 times a week, to all the kids in the school. So it was a really rare find and just a great sample to kind of look at how these programs are really impacting these children. And so to make things simple in our design, we wanted to focus on one component of self-regulation, which is attention. And so we use a very common task that a lot of scientists use called the attention network task. And this is a computerized task where children respond to the arrows inside the fish. There's a lot of different stimuli, but the main one that we focused on was the middle one in the red square. And this stimuli is said to activate neural responses responsible for attention. So kids in our lab came in and did this task while also wearing this fun little EEG cap. So as I mentioned, we used Electroencephalogram to really look at what was going on in their heads. And as I mentioned in the beginning, your neurons communicate through electrical and chemical signals. And so this device actually measures the electrical signals that are happening inside your brain. You're picking it up through these tiny little sponges all over the head that the kid wears. And because we wanted to see what's happening exactly when the child responds during that attention stimuli, we can time lock the EEG waves using something called ERP, or event-related potential. And they give us these nice little brainwaves at the very top. And then we can translate that into topographic maps to kind of see where this is all happening, where the most activation or the most electrical activation is taking place. And so in the bottom, you'll see 2 little circles, and the top of the circle would be the top of the head, if your nose is pointing that way. And the increased red color represents enhanced neural activation. So this is just an example. But to see what happened with our children in the study, compared to kids who aren't in a mindfulness program, we see a really interesting thing. So we found that children in the mindfulness group, I wish I could point, but that's hard, they show an enhanced frontal activation in their frontal lobe, which is interesting because if you see on the left-hand side where the comparison, or the sample that didn't do mindfulness is, they have a lot of activation in the back, but not so much in the front. And this is actually a very normal response for children this young. This is because children this young don't really have their frontal lobes fully developed. So we would assume this response on the left-hand side. But the mindfulness group is unique because they do show an enhanced frontal response and even less activation in this back region. So how we're interpreting it is that they are actually showing a developmentally enhanced response, possibly because mindfulness is activating this frontal region so often that their neurons are speeding up development and this circuit is being sped up, so ahead of their normal, typical development. But again, this is a very small sample. We did just a very short comparison, and there's a lot more to be done and a lot more questions to be answered, but so far this is a really good start. And because this is the very first study looking directly in children's brains in response to this program, we're excited to see what might come next. So from this study and similar studies, we're coming to believe that possibly a mindful brain is a resilient brain. And solely for the fact that these programs directly impact this frontal lobe and this frontal limbic circuit. When I asked a kindergartner at the school to give me an example of when she used mindfulness in her normal life, this is what she said.
Take 3 mindful breaths, but it took, I added 2 more. So, and then I took 5 breaths. So then, when I took 5 breaths, I was going to tell them to stop, but then I started to control my anger with the 5 breaths.
So if you didn't hear the beginning, she said, my mom and stepdad were fighting and I couldn't handle it. And so she used just this simple breathing to calm herself and make her feel a little better. And so and this girl is only 5 years old. So it's just really cool to see that these programs are having a real impact on these kids and they are using it in their day-to-day life, not just at school. And it's giving them the power to control their response to their environment because children are trapped in whatever environment they are growing up in. But this gives them a way to thrive regardless of where they're coming from. And so I'm hoping that these programs spread, which I think they are, because imagine a whole world where children are doing mindfulness on a daily basis and it's seen just as important as any academic topic. I think the world would be a lot more peaceful and kids would fare a lot better in today's society that's just becoming increasingly complex and chaotic. In our lab studies self-regulation over time, and we've come to find that interventions do really enhance self-regulation, and mindfulness is just one of those interventions that really do have an impact. And there's hope for a better future because we can see that strengthening self-regulation early on leads to more positive outcomes like academic success, mental health, and physical health benefits. So I urge you to try it out on your own if you haven't already. The research says that just 12 minutes a day can cause long-lasting changes in the brain. And of course, there's all sorts of guided meditations online. You can take an MBSR class. I'll also pass out a resource handout at the end of this if anyone's interested in learning more about things around New York City that you can join in on. And then start establishing a daily and weekly routine and fluctuate with time durations. I think the hardest part is starting out and trying to make it a habit. But over time, it gets a lot easier, just like any habit would. And then you'll start to notice your practice expand to your normal day-to-day life and just your overall presence. And I just wanted to leave you with a nice video from the school that we worked with. It shows the program in action and the teacher who led the mindfulness program.
I look at my daughter, she's 6 years old, and I wonder what's going on in that little mind of hers. Trying to get Aliza to focus is one of her big challenges. She has tantrums, she gets frustrated, and everything around her becomes a target. When we have nights like this, I have no idea what to do. I'm feeling incompetent. I'm feeling like I can't do this. I'm not a good parent. I reached out to Miss Love because this is a teacher that she sees 3 to 5 times a week who's teaching her how to learn about what's going on in her body, learn the emotions, yoga practices.
Shining stars does the Ruby Bridges class need?
When Zamir reached out to me about Aliza's struggles with attention, we made a plan for ways Aliza could use the focusing techniques we do in the yoga room to build attention skills.
Please put your hands mindfully on your anchor spot, your heart or belly. Breathing in, breathing out. Nice, Taylor. 1 minute of mindful breathing all by yourself. With your hand on your anchor spot, your heart on your belly. Which one do you use, your heart or your belly? Your heart. Okay, so you're going to really feel your breath here. And you notice when you're saying your anchor words in your mind. Can you say them with me? Okay, close your eyes.
You know that in mindfulness, our job is to be really curious about what's happening inside of ourselves. I want you to write, I wonder, and write about one of your feelings on the inside. So I'm going to read Layla's to help me give you an example, okay? Layla's wondering,
I wonder why I get so disappointed at my brother.
I wonder why I get so disappointed at my brother. Okay. We're going to practice saying, I am so focused. Okay, in a calm and sweet voice.
I am so focused. I am so focused. I am so focused. Now listen.
The next thing we're going to do is layers of sound. Open your ears really big and see if you can notice any sounds you'll hear outside of the school. Our job is to be curious today about what we notice. Now, bring your attention to sounds inside of our school but outside of the yoga room. I'll open the door. And see if you can really listen to any sounds that you might be hearing inside of you. Put one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly. Come up to sitting. I'm so curious about your noticings. We're working on being curious about things we hear outside of ourselves and inside. The next thing we're going to do is use the glitter bottles or our mind jars.
A mind jar is a glitter bottle. When you shake it, you put it down and see how your room is moving around. You use it when you have strong feelings. It just makes me feel mindful and
Time is ending and we are lying down, bellies up. Make a singing bowl in front of your heart, an imaginary singing bowl. Grow your heart really big. Put all your kind wishes in your singing bowl. And send the love and your wishes out to the world. It's kind of like having a safe haven in your pocket. This was something different that I had not seen in elementary school ever. Having the techniques that Miss Love showed us helps the girls to concentrate on their work. Relaxation before bedtime. I feel honored, I feel privileged that my daughter is going to a school that actually incorporates yoga and mindfulness. I wish I had yoga when I was young.
Can you tell me about it? It sounds like fun.
Because it is.
Well, really?
You might love yoga. Maybe do it 1,000 times.
Imagine you have a bottle of bubble soap. Take out the magic bubble wand. Now imagine that you blow a bubble. It gets bigger and bigger.
So I just want to end by thanking all of you and also everyone who's participated in that mindfulness study in my lab at Columbia and Girls Prep and the programs that kind of allowed that program at Girls Prep to happen. And of course my current lab at NYU. And then I just want to end with letting you know about some future events for neuroscience coming up. The next one is by my colleague, Dr. Rose Perry, who's here tonight. She's going to be talking even more about stress than I did, so it'll be a really great talk. And then the science of food, and then we're also starting a new series at a bar in Williamsburg. So I think science and booze would make a great combination. And then, of course, No Science is a nonprofit, so we greatly appreciate any donations made to the cause. Are there any questions so far?
Just wondering, do you think it works equally well for everybody, or are there certain like personality types, or like people that it's not going to work for, or maybe like making the person like too empathetic or something? It's not everybody needs to be one. maybe we can see less. I mean, is everybody the same, or is it are different?
Yeah, I think there's studies that look at specific populations as well. I mean, even like severely mentally ill populations that, and actually they do see kind of similar effects, less stress, at least subjectively, less stress, better able to cope with things. And as far as the brain studies go, from what I know, there is similar findings still in these same brain regions. So I'm not too familiar on literature suggesting that the personality could cause differences. Maybe those people aren't participating in these studies. But that's an interesting thing to look into.
I'm wondering if there are any studies that show that there might be a difference between practicing mindfulness by yourself, because I think that some of the major figures in study of infant and childhood development, like Donald Winnicott, they talk about how one of the critical moments in a child's development of the ego is when he learns to be alone together, like in the crib, when he's actually awake and conscious of his body, his mind is wandering, but knowing that his mother is nearby. And to me, that almost seems like a state of like meditation. Because in an infant, I'm guessing the mind is not cluttered, especially if it's been treated well. So I'm wondering if there's a difference between, because we've seen a lot in classrooms where there's people, and we're social creatures, and there's something fundamentally different with something in a group from solo. So I'm just wondering if you know anything about that.
Well, I think because this is a new field and they're trying to standardize as much as possible the different programs that they're looking at, most of the programs are in a group with one teacher, so that everyone can get the same exposure, so they can really isolate how that's changing, certain things. Although a lot of the programs like MBSR require you to do individual time or individual practice at home every day. And I think they have looked at differences between people in the program who actually did that and who didn't, and there were stronger effects in the people who went to the class and did the individual practice at home.
MBSR studies other data collected, diet, supplements, living situations, geographic locations, just other metrics, all the other things that could influence the effectiveness or the ability of that particular program.
I'm glad you brought that up. There's a ton of stuff saying how it actually impacts the immune system, at the cellular level, health, obesity, cholesterol, so many different other outcomes have been looked at. For the scope of this talk, I just focused on the brain itself. But with the resource handout, I'll actually pass around now as we're talking. You can look at the different websites I put on here, and it kind of sorts out the mindfulness studies by topic. So if you're interested in health outcomes, there's tons of literature just on that. Yeah.
So, two questions. First one is, besides cognitive behavioral and dialectical behavioral therapy, what are other good mindfulness-oriented therapies out there?
Mindfulness-based CBT. They're doing dialectical behavior therapy, so MDBT, all the acronyms. Those are the two main ones I've heard of. And then just MBSR is sometimes recommended by clinicians for their clients to do as kind of like the treatment itself. But as to my knowledge, those are the three main ones right now. It's just a different form of behavior therapy that looks like it's like a clinical behavior program. Yeah.
Have there been any studies or experiments looking at coupling the effect of the physical effect of meditating, getting oxygen into the brain versus concentrating on specific thoughts?
Yeah, so in Buddhism, there's two types. There's like a focus object centered, and then the whole environment, like the one that encompasses everything. And so they have seen differences in those two types of meditations. We have time to go over that, but in the resource handout, there's some papers on the back that you can look into that kind of talks about the mechanisms and how they differ in types. Yeah, if you come find me after the talk.
Is the Columbia study, is that beyond that?
Yeah, we have not, we just finished it.
Oh.
Yeah, and we're actually trying to collect more data on the children, but since it's summer, it's kind of a lull. So we're hoping to collect more data to increase the statistical power, so then we can publish that after.
Would you recommend any apps or websites for someone who can get with their couches on Genspace or similar apps?
Yeah, I use one myself, and I wish I knew about more. That would have been a great thing to add to the resource handout. Thank you for reminding me. The one I use is Insight Timer, and that's a cool one because it actually shows you who you're meditating with all over the world and like how many people. So it kind of gives like an accountability feel, and then they also have a lot of guided meditations you can just click on in the app itself, and then it tracks your progress kind of that.
So, Insight Timer.
Yeah.
Do you think virtual reality can enhance or detract from mindfulness training?
That's a good question. I'm not too familiar on virtual reality, but I'm assuming with the advanced technology that's happening right now, that would be a cool combination. So maybe have like a virtual mindfulness class just to give everyone access and come to think of immediately. But if you know anything, let us know because I'd love to hear about it.
Okay, cool. I think we're going to end it right there. Thank you so much, Mariah. So thank you to everyone who came out tonight. I know it's super hot, but thank you so much. So yes, Genspace will be putting on more events like this in the future, as well as another No Science Talk by Rose next month. Yes, so please stay tuned for that.